And joining us now on the debate for the full hour tonight, Greg Sorbera, Liberal candidate in the riding of Vaughan, that's him on the left, and Vic Gupta, PC candidate in the riding of Richmond Hill. Andrew Coyne, national editor of Maclean's, Martin Redcon, Ontario politics columnist at the Toronto Star, and beside him, Christina Blizzard, Queen's Park columnist for Sun Media and best-selling author. We wanted to add that as well. Good to have everybody around the table tonight for a discussion on what has proved to be the issue in the campaign so far. And I want to start by reading an editorial from someone who's not represented here today, and that's the Globe and Mail. The Globe wrote on September the 13th, the debate in the Ontario election around a tax credit for professionals new to Canada pits questionable and marginal Liberal policy against unbecoming and divisive progressive Conservative politics. It's an unfortunate distraction, especially considering the bigger challenges the province faces. Let's go around the table and find out what you all think of how this characterizes the issue. You newspaper people, just relax that it's the Globe and Mail. Is this a fair characterization, Greg Sorbera, of what's going on right now?
Almost, although obviously I think the program is a small but very valuable one because it's very narrowly targeted at a small group of professionals that need, as Jason Kenney said, to get over the experience paradox. So we think, not quite sure why the Conservatives wanted to make it the hot button issue. We think their language was embarrassing, but the program is a neat program that is going to help certain professionals get into the work that they were trained to do, and we think that's good for the economy.
Vic Gupta, does that sum it up nicely, that Globe editorial?
Well, you know, first of all, I'll say that this is a program that will virtually help no one, which we can talk about as the program goes on. Our party, our leader, was responding to the program as first announced. The Liberals went into damage control mode and changed their story and came up with a different version of the program, which again almost no one can apply for, and have called it something else. I mean, at the end of the day, the only person that has made this divisive is Dalton McGuinty and the Liberal Party. The Tim Hudak and the PC Party, we believe in fair, equal opportunity for all to compete for jobs in the marketplace. With this, we feel, whatever the Liberals may want to call this program, that it's unequal, unfair, and it, quite frankly, pits one group of Ontarians over another.
Andrew, what's the story here?
I think it's a flawed program. I think there's legitimate criticisms you can make of it. But for the Conservatives to have made it the centerpiece of their campaign for the first week, to have used such vitriolic language and indeed, in my opinion, false language about the particular thing of the foreign workers, I think is a worse sin. So whatever the demerits of the program, to have inflamed the debate to quite the extent the Conservatives have, I think is really unfortunate.
Christina.
I think it was a policy that really upset and angered a lot of people who have come here as immigrants, as I did myself. And I think that it picks winners and losers, especially at a time when a lot of people in this province are out of work, and especially young people. I believe that the Tories went completely over the top in calling it a program for foreign workers, and I think that the program itself didn't need any more embellishment to make it worse than it was. It just stood out as being a very bad policy.
Martin, what's the story?
I'm not sure the program really stood out at all. It's really 1.5 lines in a roughly 50-page platform. It's $12 million out of a budget of about $124 billion. So we're talking about a minuscule program for about 1,000 or so, 1,200 new-ish Canadians who have been here for less than 5 years but who are citizens. We can debate the merits of the program. I'm not sure it's such a loopy program. I think there are plenty of similar programs that we've seen at the federal level that the Progressive Conservatives have, to their credit, proposed in the past. And look, all platforms are about politics. People are accusing the Liberals of pandering to a particular group. Maybe they are, but that's what platforms generally do. They try to win votes.
Now that we all know where you are all coming from on this, let's get into the discussion here about whether the program's any good and whether the Conservative reaction to it was over the top. Right. What was this program designed to do in the first place?
Well, first of all, Steve, just in answer to what Christina said, governments in Canada, the federal government and 13 provinces and territories, spend literally billions of dollars in Canada on settlement programs, on training programs. We have agencies all over the world inviting people to come to this country, and we invite them if they have very high skills, it's easier for them to get in. So to criticize a program that, because it's targeted at the very people that came to this country and became citizens, it's disingenuous.
Okay, but what would the program do?
The program is a simple program. It's a bridge. It's an employment bridge for an individual that has had all of his education paid for by another government. In other words, become a professional engineer in, let's say, Scotland, and has come to this country on the basis that he's going to be able to practice his profession. But he can't get a job because he doesn't have Canadian job experience. This program will subsidize up to $10,000, not more, 1 year of training for that engineer, so that afterward, that person can go from driving a cab or mopping a floor to actually practicing as an engineer. And the fact is that that's good for the economy. That worker, that engineer will pay more taxes, he'll buy more goods, and he'll contribute more to the economy. So,
Vic, what's the problem with that?
Well, what about the mechanical engineering graduate from U of T who's right here in Ontario, whose parents may or may not have emigrated in the last, more than 6 years ago or more than 5 years ago? What about that person?
well, that person is getting a job.
Well, as a matter of fact, in my,
getting jobs.
Well, I don't know who you're talking to, Greg, but in my
well,
community
you just
of
go and
Richmond
look.
Hill,
You just go and look.
well, I didn't interrupt you
Okay,
when you
yes,
were
let's let him
speaking, so
finish.
I wouldn't mind finishing my comments. Those folks, those graduates in my community of Richmond Hill and across the province, why are those students any less valuable to get a job than the ones that the Liberal Party are targeting? This is what this is. You asked what this is. This is a clear pandering for votes. If the Liberal Party cared about ensuring that those that had foreign credentials, that they could get fast-tracked and they could get jobs, they would have done something about it over the last 8 years. In my community, we have more unemployed engineers, doctors that have been trained in foreign countries than we've ever had before. So to come up with a policy that first was about foreign workers, because Mr. Sorbera was quoted on 640 as saying, we need a policy like this to recruit people from out of province.
Now, Vic, you know that is absolutely untrue. You must not do that. You need to listen to the tape of that program and then maybe even come back here and say, sorry, I misquoted Sorbera, because that is not true. That is not what I said.
Can we figure out one thing here? Yeah. Sorry, you guys, just hang in there for a second.
Well, you know.
But here, it did seem as if the original announcement and then the clarification and then the further clarification were three different things. Mm-hmm. Would you acknowledge that this has not been rolled out in, say, the smoothest fashion?
No, actually I wouldn't, Steve. You know that on Labor Day Monday, we presented our platform. And exactly what Martin said, it had one sentence about helping skilled professionals get an opportunity to actually practice their profession. The day after that, the Premier, in a speech, said on Tuesday, the day after the platform, that this program, we're very proud of it, and it's going to be for citizens of Canada. Why did we say citizens of Canada? Simple, because we're making an investment in people, and we want those people to have very deep roots in the country.
Okay, so, let's get some feedback. The program, as has been described, on the merits. Yeah. Do you have any problem with targeting that and whether or not it potentially takes workplace experience away from somebody who was born here and may have just graduated from the University of whatever?
Well, first of all, I think you can't separate the merits from the politics of it to some extent. If you're going to roll out a program like this, and to come back to your point about the thing seeming to be rolled out in 3 different stages, they should certainly be aware of the sensitivities surrounding any time you're having preferential hiring policies, particularly with either race or proxies for race. Doesn't mean that they're illegitimate policies on the face of it, but you certainly be aware that this is going to be possibly explosive. There's even some allegations, whether they're true or not, that the Liberals might have even baited the Tories on this. And if that were true, that would be to their both parties' shame. But certainly the Liberals, I think, were reckless in not explaining this right off the top, because they should have known that this is something that could be sensitive. Secondly, the point is, it's explained in the Liberal literature, is to get people the Canadian work experience in regulated professions so they can get certified. Why should they have to have that Canadian work experience? If they've been chartered as an accountant in Scotland, why can't they start working today? It seems to me a blunderbuss approach. There could have been less explosive, less expensive per person, and more finely tuned ways of approaching the same problem.
You have any problems on the merits itself? Never mind the politics, the program itself, what it hopes to do. No problem with that?
I think the problem is that it attaches $10,000 to the worker. I don't think anyone minds $12 million going to a general program that helps workers become certified when they arrive when they're newly arrived in the country. But to attach it to a job applicant who then goes and is applying for a job with a homegrown applicant who doesn't have $10,000 attached to them, I think that becomes the issue. I mean, we've spoken about how this was just one line in the Liberal platform. Well, I would point out that John Tory's faith-based funding program was just 2 lines in the 2007 election platform. So anyone who's unaware that 1 or 2 lines in a platform is, can sink or an election campaign hasn't studied politics.
Martin, it's unbecoming of me to quote one of your competitors to you, but we all know him and like him, Adam Radwanski from the Globe and Mail. And he said that the Liberal Party did, quote, a spectacularly clumsy job in explaining this thing and rolling it out. Do you agree with that analysis?
No, I think, and my friend Andrew called it reckless as well. And no, I think we're looking for conspiracy theories here where there may not be anything other than left hand, right hand not being totally in sync. I think it's true that McGuinty, Premier McGuinty, the next day specified Canadian citizens. So the rollout in retrospect did not go as smoothly and harmoniously as the Liberals would have wanted. I happen to agree personally, we can talk about this later perhaps, that we do have to be careful in this country. We're not as perfect as we like to think we are in Canada about some of these issues. I think it's easy to scratch that itch and find that people actually will react in ways that you may or may not expect. When I was overseas, I saw in Australia how race, ethnicity, and that kind of issue can come to the fore. But I think we're different in Canada from America. We are highly influenced by their political culture. But I don't think affirmative action is quite the dirty word in this country that it is in the U.S. We do have a tradition of employment equity here and trying to level the playing field that we don't have in the U.S.
I want to find out you're running in Richmond Hill, you're knocking on doors presumably. Sometimes these issues become a big deal for people inside politics or media who cover politics, but people at home could care less about it. Are you hearing about this at the door?
Well, what people care about is they want to know what is the real jobs plan to get them a job. And when I explain to them that there's a policy out there that perhaps gives somebody else a job over them because there's a $10,000 credit, people are offended and insulted. And I'll tell you something, in Richmond Hill, most of those people are from what we so-call new Canadian communities. They're people that have been here, according to the Liberal policy, longer than 5 years, and they're not eligible. I met a woman from Bangladesh. She applied to come to Canada in 2002. She got here in 2005. She's a doctor. She still can't practice in her profession. The Liberal policy wouldn't help her. I met a guy who is a buyer. He has a certificate program. He also happens to be from India. He just got laid off his job. He's been here for 10 years. The Liberal policy wouldn't help him.
So what was magic about the 5-year cutoff in deciding how to structure this program?
Part of it was, Steve, the research that we did on the barriers and the track that foreign skilled workers find themselves in. Our research showed that if you're away from your training for 6 years or more, it is very unlikely that you will ever practice that profession. And so we just thought on the very merits we shouldn't have an open-ended, it doesn't matter how many years you've been here. We wanted to keep down the amount of money we were spending. These are lean times. And so we identified that if you've only been away from your studies for 5 years, your professional training, it's more likely that with a bridge program, and by the way, we are not providing jobs, permanent jobs, for these workers. We're providing a 1-year bridge program so that they can compete, Vic, on an even playing field with the other engineers
Martin
and the other radiologists that are coming out of Canadian schools.
Some people are saying this program is tokenism. I think you might use that line, pandering and so on. I think it's, try to put this in perspective, more of a token program. It's a small amount of money, it's a small envelope. A lot of the Liberal platform promises are actually not large amounts of money, allowing doctors to do home care visits and house calls and home care and so on. So I don't know that we should look at this as some kind of you mentioned faith-based funding in the last election. That might have been 2 or 3 lines, but it affected virtually half of the school population in this province. We're talking about 1,200 people here. It's a small window. It's true that you have to have a citizenship, which means it's only a small number of people who are eligible. I don't agree, though, with this notion that Andrew suggested, and Andrew has a wonderful theoretical framework, which I always love listening
Is that
to.
a compliment or what?
It is. It's a backhanded
Okay.
compliment. But in practice, everything you hear anecdotally and some of the research is that people actually do have a problem, even if they're coming from Scotland, trying to use that foreign credential here in Canada. And what you do hear most often is you need to have a line of Canadian experience in the resume. I'm not saying this program is perfect. I think it is a kind of token program. But I think it does address what they are hearing from people in Toronto.
Christina, some of the criticism I suspect you may have run into online or even personally to your emails is people won't necessarily know this because you've lost your accent, but where are you from originally?
Well, I'm from London, England.
London,
originally,
UK.
Yes.
Okay, so
where the riots were recently, my hometown.
Not because of you, though. You didn't cause those riots.
So once upon a time, you came over here
Yes,
as
I
a
did. I-
immigrant,
as a-
foreign worker, as it were.
That's
Once
right.
upon a time, but people have emailed me saying, "How can she write this and how can she feel this way? She's white. She's not the problem. She's not the issue. The people who need the help are not people who." Are the majority in the country. It's somebody from Bangladesh and somebody from India who may not look like you. Do you accept that as a legitimate criticism?
No, I don't. I think that anyone who has been through the immigrant experience, and I came here, I was 17 years old when I arrived by myself in Toronto, where you don't know anyone, where you have to start afresh, find a job on your own. I really don't buy the fact that just because I'm white, that I don't understand the immigrant experience. I think that is nonsense. I know I got a lot of emails accusing me of being xenophobic. Well, you know what? I'm not xenophobic. I grew up in a completely different culture, and I'm very open-minded. I think that this policy is happening at the wrong time. There are so many, the unemployment rate for youth in this province is staggering. There are so many young people who are out of work. There are so many people who have, a lot of immigrants, such as me, have come here. We've worked hard, and this is what I heard from a lot of families from all around the world, from Italian, Indian, whatever. They have come here. They've put their children, their young people, through universities, or their young people have put themselves through universities, and now they're applying for jobs, and there aren't many jobs out there.
Okay.
And now they're going up against people who have a $10,000 subsidy attached to them.
Part of what makes this story a little more interesting and a little more flavorful is the fact that this is something that came out a year ago. Now, this is Bill 89, which was proposed as a private member's bill in the Ontario legislature by Mr. Hudak, Tim Hudak, the leader of the Conservative Party. And I want to read a small excerpt from the bill, and then we'll talk about that. The bill enacts Section 103.1 of the Taxation Act 2007 to provide a new, non-refundable tax credit. The tax credit is available to eligible employers in respect of qualifying employees if the employers arrange for these employees to receive training in English as a second language or French as a second language. Qualifying employees include individuals who have resided in Canada for no more than 2 years and who are permanent residents of Canada or have been granted Canadian citizenship. The language training must be relevant to the qualifying employee's employment. The tax credit is 10% of the wages that the eligible employer paid to the qualifying employees during the period they received the language training. Vic, I want to start with you on this. How is this different from what he's proposing?
Well, this is completely different. The fundamental difference is, and you can laugh about it, Greg, but it's actually not funny at all. The big difference is that here is a program that provides a small, modest grant subsidy for those people who already have a job. It's a $400 tax credit for somebody who has a job to get English or French language training to help them further integrate. It doesn't give a $10,000 bribe to an employer to hire someone over someone else.
But if they need English or French as a second language training, that presumes they're new immigrants, right?
Well, whatever it presumes in terms of their language requirements, the difference is it doesn't incentivize somebody to hire that person.
But it's a tax credit of 10% of the wages for whomever would be targeted by this program.
Up to a maximum of $400 specifically to go towards language training. This isn't money that goes into an employer's pocket. This doesn't incentivize them to hire somebody over somebody else. And $400 is a lot different than a $10,000 gift, if you will, to an employer.
But
Furthermore, the other aspect of that bill talks very specifically about fast tracking or providing far more information to do something about advancing people's credential assessment here in Canada and Ontario. So, you know, again, over the last 8 years, the Liberals have done absolutely nothing to advance foreign credential assessment, to get those people that have been trained in other countries. I gave you the examples, Greg, in my community, and you've done nothing to advance their cause. Our bill, that bill, and it's in Change Book, we're the only party that pledged to actually do something about that. We're going to provide people more information. We're going to ask the Fairness Commissioner to look at all across the globe and North America to find out the best practices.
Let me get some feedback. I mean, he says this is dramatically different from what you've proposed.
Well, you know, if I were Tim Hudak criticizing Tim Hudak's bill, Tim Hudak would be shouting from the rooftops about his own bill. Why, with 500,000 people unemployed in Ontario, are you spending money on language training for people who already have jobs? So, you know, it's a little bit disingenuous, but Steve, the fact is, on this whole issue, this is not a big program. This is a small but important program. And the reason why it became a big issue is because even after he knew it wasn't true, Tim Hudak spent 5 days in 5 different communities shouting and screaming about why the McGuinty government wanted to provide help, quote, to foreign workers.
We're going to get to that. Hold off. We're going to get to that.
We'll finish up with this bill. There's nothing wrong with Tim's bill. It's language training. It's a good idea. It could cost more than $400. I've read the definition.
But it doesn't, in his words, bribe people to hire people with $10,000 subsidies. It offers a much smaller, more modest stipend.
But you know, our program is not a bribe. It's a bridge for a few highly skilled professionals. This bill, you know, I remember when it was introduced, I don't think it was offensive. I think that the fact that at one time Tim Hudak believed in helping newcomers to this country. Look at the title of the section of the bill. Not that title, but down the road where the specific provision is, and it refers to assistance to newcomers in Ontario.
It says it on the front, an act to implement measures relating to newcomer employment opportunities by amending various acts.
And we're saying, why is it if 15 months ago, Tim Hudak believed in providing incentive to newcomers, during the election campaign, it's such a terrible, awful thing?
Andrew, you got a view on this?
I do think there's a world of difference between a small training grant and a rather large hiring incentive. I do think those are qualitatively different. I may be applying a wonderful theoretical framework to that, but I think there were more targeted ways in which you could have helped more people. You do want to be careful when you're framing government policy not to be or be seen to be arbitrary. And the 5-year cutoff is a little difficult to explain, and it is going to cause people to question it. Doesn't invalidate the program on its own, but it does mean you're leaving yourself open to these charges. I think, as I say, I come back to the point of if the question is, why can't these people get certified? Why can't we make it easier for them to get certified rather than just thrusting a handful of $1,000 bills at employers to hire them?
Yeah, Steve, can I just comment on that? Because over the course of 8 years, including hiring a fairness commissioner, we have been working on breaking down the barriers in medicine, in engineering, and in a variety of professions. We're not there yet. Jean Augustine has been doing that work for us, and she's done commendable work. That's why when Vic says you've done nothing, it's just absolutely not true. We're not there yet, and we absolutely agree, Andrew, with the need to break down those barriers. We don't think this program is going to need to go on forever.
But that's the criticism I've heard from, I mean, somebody sent me an email the other day saying, if you really wanted to help new workers, you know, you wouldn't waste your time with these $10,000 subsidies. You'd knock on the door of, for example, the College of Physicians and Surgeons and say, come on, let's get to it.
Well, you know,
they say you haven't done that enough.
Which is also an interprovincial trade barrier issue as well. You know, all the provinces do this.
The answer to that question is actually quite simple. There are circumstances in most professions where you need Canadian job experience. For example, in engineering, you need to have lived with Canadian building codes and Canadian standards in a wide variety of engineering matters in order to actually get a job as an engineer. And none other than Jason Kenney talked about the experience paradox. You can't get a Canadian job because you don't have Canadian experience, and you can't get Canadian experience without a Canadian job.
Just for those who don't know, Jason Kenney is a federal Conservative cabinet minister, and you don't usually quote federal Conservative cabinet ministers.
But his description of that paradox is the very reason why we think a program for highly skilled Canadians who need that bridge is a good idea.
Okay, Martin and Vic.
I want to just bridge to what we're talking about now, which is the private members bill that the Conservative leader brought forward. I've been on the campaign trail with your leader, Vic, Tim Hudak, in which he has, I think, quite pointedly brought up the issue of language and talked to his grandfather, maybe his great-grandfather, I think, but his grandfather who came from Czechoslovakia and came here without any money in his pocket and didn't speak the language and didn't take any government handouts. The message to me in code, or even in plain English, is you shouldn't be getting government handouts. And yet here's a bill which is doing exactly that on language. Admittedly, a small amount of money. I don't think $10,000 is really going to make that many employers choose one person over another. But I think we have to be clear about the politics here. You know, Tim Hudak has translated Changebook, which you talked about, into 15 foreign languages besides French and English. I'm not sure that playing this kind of language game helps him to profit from the inroads that Jason Kenney has made with conservative and ethnic voters in the last little while.
Well, well, obviously I disagree with your point about a $10,000 bribe being enough to give somebody a choice of one job over another. I mean, absolutely. An employer who's hiring an engineer at $50,000 or $60,000 to have as a starting job to be given a $10,000 credit, that's a significant credit. And we know how businesses think they're there to make money and create even more jobs, and so they're definitely going to hire that person over another. I guess my point to Greg would be simply this. All of your points are valid, Greg, but except you still are choosing one group of Ontarians over another. The Ontario graduate, whether they're from India originally as a new immigrant, whether they're from China, whether they're from Bangladesh, or wherever they're from, you're choosing somebody who's been here for less than 5 years, who is a Canadian citizen, over that graduate. That graduate also needs Canadian work experience. And I want to make one final point, Steve. If your program actually was meant to help anybody, it would have been more thought through than it is. It's a 5-year window. You have to be here for 3 years as a landed immigrant to apply for Canadian citizenship. The current processing time on the CIC website today is 19 months. That leaves a window of 5 months. So come on, this is a joke, right? There is really no attempt to help anybody. It's a political pander at its worst, and it's meant to do exactly what's been done here. It's meant to divide people.
Andrew.
We should say that it is a more broad problem with all of the parties' policies is that they all have subsidy programs to hire somebody, whether it's subsidies to the auto industry, for example. And every time you do that, you're favoring one group of workers over another, which we shouldn't be doing. So it's not on as explosive grounds as race or ethnicity, but it's nevertheless, when you're using government subsidies to tilt the playing field towards one industry or one firm, you're doing so at the expense of other industries, other firms, and other jobs, and no politician in any party ever wants to admit that.
And that, my friends, is the wonderful theoretical framework for which you are so famous. Okay, I want to just ask our Michael Smith. You got that ad teed up? Because I know you're always, I can tell this group is ready to get into this now. The whole issue of the term foreign workers. Here is the original Progressive Conservative Party ad on this issue. Roll tape, please. Vic, you want to tell us what the idea is there?
Well, you know, again, this policy has changed, more times
Not
than
the policy, the ad.
No, well, let's talk about the policy, because the ad is based on the policy, right? The ad is based on the policy. The policy described newcomers, which is in many cases interpreted as foreign workers. There's a specific definition around foreign workers, those that are out of province. We have quotes. Greg can deny that they were taken out of context that suggest that this was done to recruit people from out of province. We have quotes from the Minister of Finance, the senior-most people in the Liberal campaign, to suggest that this was to encourage people from out of province. This is not about immigrants versus non-immigrants. This is about Ontarians versus non-Ontarians.
I'm just looking at the ad, and the word foreign is all uppercase and underlined. That's not by accident. I'm just wondering why you did that.
Well, I think it's to drive the point home that this policy, as it was first announced, was not targeted for people in Ontario. It was targeted for people that are from out of province, whether they're from Manitoba or Saskatchewan. It was putting them ahead of an Ontario worker who is unemployed. That's the premise of that ad. It's to drive that point, to communicate to Ontario voters that they have a choice. They have a choice of a premier who believes in putting, at the time, non-Ontario workers ahead of Ontario unemployed workers.
Anything wrong with that ad?
That is, that's really embarrassing, Vic. The fact is that ad, you know it, everyone that follows politics knows it, was to create a misimpression amongst voters and to play on the biases of a small number of voters in this province.
That's
You know,
absolutely
just
false.
Vic, hold on a second. We all know what foreign workers are. We have a system to bring foreign workers into Ontario, and thousands come every year. They harvest crops, they do a variety of jobs, and then they go home. And Tim Hudak kept using that. And I want to tell you my theory. I think Tim Hudak is trying to drive the progressive out of progressive conservative. I think he's trying to create a party of the extreme right, and the evidence is in the capitalization and underlying of foreign workers. The evidence is in his plan a year ago to get rid of the Human Rights Commission. The evidence is in his...
Well, hang on. We don't want to go too far down this road because he's keeping your full-day kindergarten, he's keeping your HST, he's not getting rid of the Human Rights Tribunal. And,
Yeah, but the fact
there's
is
not as
that,
much change in the change book as people think.
Putting sex offenders online, creating chain gangs. I mean, these are, to me, Steve, these are just indications of a shift to the right. But I think the Premier said it appropriately when he said, Tim should just apologize for trying to be divisive and create anger amongst ordinary Ontarians who understand very much that this program was for Canadian citizens.
Okay, Christina, that ad, what do you think?
I think it's just ham-fisted. I don't think that there's any great right-wing conspiracy in this. I think that frankly, I think the progressive conservative campaign has been lacked focus. It is not as slick and well-oiled as the Liberal one, and I think that this is just simply...
Is that a compliment?
You are the campaign chair.
I mean, it's slick.
It's a sort of a backhanded
That's
compliment.
an interesting choice of
Well,
words.
machinery, that's a perfectly legitimate
We're running a
expression.
strong campaign, thank you.
Okay, well oiled. And I just think that the Conservative campaign has gone. It was unnecessary to use the word foreign workers. People understood when you told people about this issue. When you told voters about this. When I wrote about this in my column, people who had come here with a similar experience, such as myself, understood what it is. It was immigrants themselves. It was people who had come through the immigrant experience.
So why didn't they say immigrants instead of foreign workers?
I have no idea because I think it pushed it over the top. It made them look foolish.
What's your view on the ad?
Even without the foreign workers, I think the Tory campaign on this would be objectionable. I mean, the foreign workers thing is just objectionable. The foreign workers thing is just palpably dishonest. There's just no two ways about it. It's just not true. So that takes it into, I agree, takes it into another territory. But even short of that, this is a well-worn playbook, unfortunately, that all of the parties, and we can come back to some other examples from the past, but all the parties play is where you seize on one policy and you make it seem as if it's the biggest thing in the world. The scale of those ads, the intensity, the ominous music, it's all designed to impress upon people you have something to fear here, you have something to resent here, this is going to affect you in some way, it's going to take things away from you in some way, and they can't run away from that. That is what they're trying to do. It's not designed to make legitimate criticisms, it's designed to inflame.
Martin.
Well, I think the ad was over the top. I think what was at play here was an attempt to profit politically by pressing every button, scratching every itch, and I've seen it. I've seen the response in parts of rural Ontario with predominantly white audiences where there aren't a lot of engineers and architects and professionals in the crowd, and just whipping up this sense that you are being excluded. As the script that you've read says and as the ad shows, if you're not from Ontario, you need not apply. If you don't pay taxes here, you cannot apply, and so on. It's wrong. I've seen elections fought and won on this issue in Australia, as I've said, when you're dealing with boat people, and I've seen how it can turn even in Toronto. I don't just remind you, a year or so ago, when a man named Rob Ford complained about a boatload of Tamil migrants coming to Toronto, his opponent in that mayoral race, a guy named George Smitherman, said, you know, that's a turning point in the campaign. Well, it was a turning point, and it was turned in favor of Rob Ford. Dalton McGuinty spoke out a couple of days later and said that Rob Ford did not reflect the sentiments of most Ontarians. He was wrong too, because a poll came out about a week or two later showing that a majority of Ontarians wanted to send back every single one of those Tamil migrants back to Sri Lanka, even if they were found to be legitimate refugees. So if you scratch that itch, people will respond.
Ears open, everybody, because there was a second ad that came out. This was a radio ad. And Michael, bottom of the page, let's play that ad if we can right now, please. Roll tape.
Our kids need jobs, the kind of jobs that you can buy a home and raise a family with. At a time when 500,000 Ontarians are out of work, Dalton McGuinty is spending your tax dollars on an affirmative action subsidy, $10,000 per job for the lucky few. It's not fair and it's not equal. Tim Hudak will create jobs for hardworking Ontario families, regardless of who they are or when they came to Canada. It's time for change in Ontario. Authorized by the CFO Ontario PC Party.
Now, Vic, we can't help but notice that the words foreign workers do not appear, or excuse me, are not heard in that ad. This is a subsequent ad. The inference is you took a lot of heat when you included foreign workers in the first ad, and therefore you dropped it in the second. Is that accurate?
No, I think the reality is, as I said earlier, we're reacting to the changing Liberal policy on the fly, and so the Liberals made great hay of the fact that this was targeted for Canadian citizens, and they had to be here for less than 5 years, and so obviously we pointed out the obvious unfairness and inequality in that, and use this particular ad to do that.
I may be wrong about these things, but I always assume that nothing happens by accident in campaigns. We all know that's not true. Lots of stuff happens by accident. But in advertising, where you have a chance to think about it ahead of time and script it and focus group test it, the fact that foreign workers is not in the subsequent ad, made my antennae go up. Am I reading too much into this?
Well, I think what you should be reading into it is that the Liberals can't get their policy straight, right? And when they realize that a foreign worker, when recruiting people out of the province to take jobs from Ontarians, ahead of Ontarians, where the subsidy was unpopular, they changed their policy. Again, here's a policy that has a window of maybe a maximum of 5 months for you to apply. If the Liberals actually wanted to help anyone, they'd have a policy that was more substantive. So we're reacting to the basic premise of this policy, which is inherently unfair and unequal.
That ad didn't...
Can I just move into the theoretical realm for a moment? It's
that's
true.
interesting.
It's true. I'm going to just borrow that.
I don't deal with
He's got copyright on that. Go ahead.
Premier Hudak, if he were to keep this program, if elected Premier October 6th, could just get on the phone to Jason Kenney in Ottawa and say, can you speed up that program and improve the processing times? I happen to know that processing times can move up from 6 months to 18 months to 24 months. So it's true that the math now makes the Liberals look a little silly. It's a small window, but it's not always that long a processing time.
And
Martin, that's actually not as big a problem as you can imagine, because while someone has to be here for 3 years to apply for citizenship, once that person has applied for citizenship, he or she can actually, if he or she is going to need this kind of upgrading, can look for the opportunity whilst the approval for citizenship is going on. So, in a sense, there's a 2-year window when you can do the job.
So there's the latest
but
modification to their program.
I just want to get back. I want to get back to the ad for a second, because
which one?
The foreign worker ad and the radio ad. I think Martin had it bang on. These ads do have an impact. Those words were chosen very deliberately. There are still people in my riding who are saying to me, Greg, we're going to vote for you, but why are you giving this money to foreign workers? And so it's not as if they thought, oh my God, we've got the program wrong and now we're going to have to change our... It's deliberate. Everything in a campaign, in our campaigns, every word we use.
So why did they drop it?
Well, I think they dropped it because the reaction from the Fourth and the Fifth and Estate was so powerful. It was so offensive.
It changed
to so misrepresent a program. I think the heat just got too much in the kitchen, and they finally changed.
You heard the copy change from foreign workers to affirmative action. Is that significant?
Yes. I think they did get burned on the foreign workers thing because there was just no way you could nuance it. It was clearly untrue. They were getting a lot of heat from the press on it. I think they realized they had to back away from it. Affirmative action is more about, or employment equity, or these various words they're used for, is more legitimate grounds because there's a philosophical difference there that you can explore. but just factually, it's not a program for foreign workers.
Okay, I want to look at the other side of the coin. Michael, I'm going to pull a bit of an audible on you here. I want to skip the next page. We'll come back to it. I want to go to the Christina Blizzard column in the Toronto Sun to see if the Liberals are completely covered in glory on this issue as well. So let's bring this one up. Chris Blizzard, you've entitled this, Liberals are as guilty, ? And here it is. If anyone knows how to use fear, xenophobia, and division in an election, it's the Liberals. Look at what they did to former PC leader John Tory over faith-based school funding in 2007. Back then, McGuinty said Tory's plan to fund all religious schools would result in, quote, sequestration and segregation. It was nonsense and was code for saying we don't want Islamic schools funded by taxpayers. Okay, the flip side of this is, and go ahead, Vic, to you first on this one, do you think that the Liberals have kind of played a card from the bottom of the deck here? They maybe have sensed that you've made a mistake by using the expression foreign workers, and now they're beating you like a drum with it.
Well, I think, as I said earlier, I think that the Liberals are the only ones that are being divisive. I think we live in a province of immigrants. I mean, come on, look at our candidates, look at those of us that are sitting here at the table. We all came at one point from somewhere else. To suggest that our leader is somehow anti-immigrant is quite frankly insulting to all immigrants that have been here. And so it's the Liberals who played this divisive card to drive the wedge between immigrant communities and non-immigrant or communities that have been here, let's say, for longer than
Okay, let
30
me
to
ask
40
Greg,
years.
are you overplaying this hand by coming out and, I mean, some of your people have accused the Conservatives of xenophobia, racism. I mean, it's a tough list.
Not me. I thought the fact that 3 or 4 days ago the Premier said, let's put this issue to bed. We think that Tim Hudak should apologize for his language, and let's get on with the important elements of this campaign. But the commercials still run. Today in the mail at my house, I got a pamphlet, I live in Richmond Hill, from Vic Gupta, which said no to foreign investment, that is Samsung, no to support for international students, and no to support for, I'm not sure in your brochure whether you said foreign workers or affirmative action, but it was negative, negative, negative. Each of the 3 things on your brochure is about people from other lands, Samsung, South Korea, international students, skilled professionals. So we're not talking about it. We're only responding to it. And it's the Conservatives that keep hammering on this notion that, well, I mean, argue by way of example, General Motors and Chrysler are very big foreign companies. Tim Hudak didn't raise a squeak when we invested in those companies to save the auto industry.
He wasn't nutty about it at first. He came out and said he wasn't crazy about the idea.
But he came around, and his party, and certainly when John Tory was there and we were building the auto program.
Well, let's just say it. Are you saying that if General Motors had a more Korean-sounding name, he would have had a bigger problem with the investment?
I'm saying, why is it that it's Samsung, it's international students, and it's these skilled professionals from whose education, by the way, unlike the engineer trained in Ontario, costs about $100,000.
Okay.
It costs about $100,000 to train an engineer in Ontario.
Here we go again. So we're talking about who's fanning the flames on this.
Vic, I got your brochure this morning.
We have a veiled suggestion here that once again, somehow the PC party is anti-immigrant or anti-foreigner. I mean, this is preposterous, right? The fact of the matter is the choice that we will continue to draw contrast in this campaign. We will draw contrast between a legacy, a history of the last 8 years of high taxes and continuing high taxes that folks will get under Dalton McGuinty, and a low tax relief regime that they'll get with Tim Hudak. We're going to draw the contrast.
Service cuts.
We're going to draw and we're going to draw the contrast that when given the choice, Dalton McGuinty and Greg Sorbera have chosen to put money to recruit companies and students from outside of Ontario versus giving money to Ontario students who need it and to giving jobs to Ontario companies that need them.
Let's get these 3 to weigh in. Go ahead.
It's more than a little outrageous to accuse people of racism for opposing throwing money at Samsung. I think Greg would really want to back off on that one. But to take up Christina's point, The only thing funnier than hearing Vic try to explain away the foreign workers line is the Liberal piety about not pushing racial hot buttons. The Liberals ran and won in the 2007 election by essentially a coded appeal to anti-Muslim fear. What was brilliant about it, what was subtler about it than the Tories, which is much cruder, is that they couched it as an appeal to universal tolerance. Universal tolerance that was somehow threatened. How was it threatened? Well, we had this program where we already fund Catholic schools. That doesn't threaten it, but if you extended it to other religions, it would. Which other religions would that be? You might go back and look at the debate that they ran in 2007. I believe you're the moderator for it. And the Premier McGuinty's opening statement, and I'll only paraphrase slightly, when he said, "When I travel around the world and people ask me, why hasn't Ontario experienced the strife in the streets that they've had in," and here's the places he chose, by random perhaps, London, Paris, the Netherlands, and Germany, all of which had experienced recent Muslim unrest. It was brilliantly done. It was essentially appealing to some pretty ugly sentiments, but they did a lot better than the Tories did. But for them to be saying, how dare you appeal to intolerance and xenophobia, is a bit rich.
Are they doing it here?
Which way?
The Liberals.
Well, they did with that Samsung line was certainly an attempt to play racial politics from the other side.
That's what I'm asking.
Andrew, let me just answer that. I'm just wondering out loud why Vic's brochure and the Conservative campaign points to the Samsung investment.
Because it was an outrageous policy.
Well, now just
it's a waste of money. Corporate welfare of the worst kind.
But in your view, all of the investments that we make with corporations to strengthen the job market are outrageous investments. You don't like it, and I accept that. We have a different view of how to strengthen the economy.
That's a legitimate debate. So why drag in the fact that Samsung is a Korean company?
No, I'm just saying, I'm asking out loud, why are the Conservatives, of all the investments that we've made, and you've listed them in a wide variety of areas, whether it's auto, whether it's manufacturing, whether
Video
it's
games?
What, video games?
$250 million for video game manufacturing.
Why is it that the one that is on the brochure that comes into my house is not the video game manufacturer, is not Ford, is not Chrysler, it's Samsung?
That's a legit question, isn't it?
The biggest and
Go
most
ahead.
outrageous.
No, it's not.
It's in the
not the
billions
biggest.
Christina,
of dollars.
not the
no, it's
biggest.
not. It is $110 million. It is not anywhere near the biggest.
Down from $400 million. But that's not $7 billion. So I have to say, I'm going to respectfully disagree with Andrew. I've been listening to Tim Hudak's criticisms of the Samsung deal, and they are phrased, again, using code language, which is what politicians do, to highlight the foreign aspect of it, the overseas aspect of it, the Asian aspect of it, the foreignness of it.
You really think he's doing that?
Yes, I do.
What's the evidence?
Repetition and framing. It's scholarships for foreign students. Never mind that he took foreign scholarships himself when he was studying in the U.S. We're going to take that money, divert it to Ontario students, because otherwise you are left out.
I agree on that, but that's not Samsung.
Correct. And the three are always grouped together by
So
Tim.
he's
There's
beating
no
a
question.
nativist drum here, you think?
He's a remarkable economic nationalist. You should check this out. He wants to cancel the contract. I don't recall progressive conservatives talking about canceling contracts. But let me just go back to the question of, there's no question McGuinty played that card as well. I didn't follow the election as closely, I wasn't covering it, but he profited from that hot button item in the last election. But what's clear to me, I don't think Tim Hudak is a racist by any means. I think he's doing what politicians do. He's trying to have it both ways. Yeah. And he has tried to reach out to new Canadians and other cultural communities. He's translated Changebook, as I've said. But he is also pressing this button. And what's interesting about this compared to some of his predecessors, Bill Davis once told Tim Hudak, "Tim, you'll never be criticized for the speech you don't give." He gave this speech over and over again on foreign workers. Much like the ads being screened and tested, this stump speech was repeated time and time again. So it's not an accident.
Christina.
Well, I think it's sort of ironic that the Conservative campaign has been focused so far not on what their policies are, but they've sort of lucked into this very bad policy on the part of the Liberals, which they are now sort of trying to turn around. I mean, Tim Hudak went into this campaign 12 points in the lead and seemed to think he could cruise to victory by not being Dalton McGuinty. And he has lucked into this stumble by the Liberals. I'm with all due respect, Mr. Sobera, I do believe that this was a misstep.
Much respect in that too, Christina.
And I think that voters really, what what Hudak and the Conservatives need to understand is that voters need a little bit more than a mistake on the part of your opponents in order to get elected.
Absolutely, and this is a point worth making is, what is he not doing? He's not doing what Mike Harris did in '95, for example, when he brings out a policy a day, when he tells you what he would do if in office. When parties don't do that, then people pick up the signal that they don't actually have, they're not offering much in the way of change. They're just going to try and hammer away at a few hot button issues and hope that they can win by default.
Okay, 5 minutes to go here. Let's put one more thing on the table. And Michael, I'm on chapter 5 here. Let's do this. Sorry, guys. Adam Radwanski. We like Adam Radwanski on this program. He's a good guest and a good writer. Here's what he wrote in the Globe and Mail the other day. The Liberals' platform has over 9,000 words. They have only 40 words for newcomers and immigrants. 4 lines. That's a quote from Punjabi Post editor-in-chief Jagdish Grewal, sounding incredulous. We are just like other Canadians. We need better health services, better education, reduced auto insurance rates. We don't want to get dragged into this non-issue. At the end of the day, is the ironic flashlight that has been shone on this issue pointing to the fact that you guys in a huge platform really aren't talking to new immigrants very much at all. And is that a bigger problem for you at the end of the day?
Well, first of all, this has become an issue because, just as Martin said, Tim Hudak decided to make it an issue every day in his stump speech. This is a very small part of the platform. I think we are talking to, I hope we're talking to all Ontarians on our platform. We are talking about improving healthcare services, and admittedly, we're talking specifically about better healthcare services for an expanding, aging population. That's why we want to do home visits by doctors.
The Punjabi Post editor doesn't seem to think that you're targeting new Canadians adequately.
Well, that may be his opinion. We think that developing programs, well, let me give you another example. We are proposing to institute a 30% reduction in the tuitions that university students and college students pay. We think that those who struggle most are new Canadians because often they're in the lower echelons of the economic ladder, and they struggle to get their kids into colleges and universities, and we think this is going to help them greatly.
Vic, at the end of the day, does this shine a light on the fact that none of the parties in particular is focusing enough on new Canadians who may have it tougher than those who've been here for several generations?
Well, I think there's a lot of, again, the term new Canadians is probably open to a lot of definition, but my family came here in '68. And my folks struggled and worked very hard, didn't ask for a handout from anybody, and they've got 3 kids, at least 2 of them, maybe the third one's still yet to emerge in a successful career. But no, we're all quite successful. We've worked hard. I think there are amazing success stories with new Canadians across this province. I think at the end of the day, what new Canadians want is what every other Ontarian wants. They want a job, they want a future. They've come here to build a better life for their family. And you're right, the Liberal platform doesn't speak to them because it doesn't speak to jobs planned for any Ontarian. Absolutely it does. It talks about putting money back in people's pocket after 8 years of successive tax hikes, and people are feeling the pinch. In my community, when I talk about our plan, Changebook, which is to reduce taxes, which is to allow people to income share for young families, that's a huge benefit, to reduce the HST off of their hydro bill and their heating bill.
Changebook is coming later when Tim Hudak gets here. 30 seconds to each of you.
To your point, the quote you just quoted from highlights that not just politicians like to have it both ways, but members of the ethnic press, like all members of the press, like everybody, likes to have it both ways. And this illustrates why there might be some attention being paid to the immigrant community by the Liberals, because there are strong demands for help.
30 to you, 30 to you.
Where I think the mistake is that people who come to this country, people who are immigrants, are risk takers. They're prepared, they understand that they're coming here, it's going to be difficult, and they're prepared to struggle. They know it's going to be a struggle, and they're very entrepreneurial, and they're really willing to take those risks.
Brother Coyne gets the last word.
I do not lie awake at night worrying that the Liberal Party is not pandering to any section of the community sufficiently. It's hard to know exactly what the editor of the Punjabi Post wants. What programs does he think don't exist that should exist? There are dozens and dozens and dozens of federal, provincial, and municipal programs to help immigrants. He should point out exactly what he thinks the deficiencies are rather than simply saying more.
Campaign 40 has occasionally gotten testy, but this was a very civilized discussion for which I'm grateful to all of you. Greg Sorbera, the Liberal candidate in Vaughan, Vic Gupta, the PC candidate in Richmond Hill, and our journalists on the other side of the table, Christina Blizzard, flanked by Andrew Coyne and Martin Regcon. We look forward to reading your future dispatches on this election campaign. Thanks, everybody.